Thank you so much for joining us today on the Gold Silver Bitcoin Show, brought to you by the GoldSilverBitcoin.com store. We are more than honored to be sitting down today with Stephen Dodge and Ian Major, the co-founders of Sovereign Society. So thank you both for joining us today.
Greatly appreciate
Having
it.
us on.
Glad to be here.
So you guys are building an NFT application on Stacks, which is building on Bitcoin. And I think a lot of people have wanted this type of functionality, DeFi functionality on Bitcoin. And so we're getting to that point. We've seen Lightning Network have some success recently. I think we've, although I've recently spoken with people who say that at this point on the Bitcoin network itself, Lightning Network isn't necessarily a necessity because the cost of transactions there's not too much pressure on it. But nonetheless, we've seen a lot of successes with Lightning Network recently in, say, El Salvador, on Twitter as well. And then we've got some DeFi projects that are burgeoning on top of RSK, which has been working on a smart contracting solution for Bitcoin for many years now. So I'm delighted to finally be able to speak about NFTs on Bitcoin. So can you guys kind of talk about some of the challenges to doing something like NFTs on Bitcoin and how you overcame those challenges?
To your point, we're in a phase where, Bitcoin, which is historically, really any form of money starts as that kind of store of value. We're seeing it become a medium of exchange through Lightning before our very eyes. And so now it's about how do we further extend those capabilities, whether it's decentralized finance, as you mentioned, or one of the big areas that we're focused a lot on with Sovereign Society is this idea of data sovereignty, right? When you think about data being an extension of ourselves in cyberspace, it's no secret in 2021, data is being used and misused and abused all the time as you go about your way on the modern web. And so what we really want to do with Sovereign Society is enable individuals to monetize that valuable asset and do so by codifying that data in an NFT. And what this does is a few things. It gives a very engaging kind of way for users to kind of take control of this valuable digital asset. But importantly, it also ensures the integrity of the underlying data. So the NFT here is really both an NFT, which is, we've obviously seen all the demand for NFTs, but we really want to extend that into the realm of kind of data integrity. And so we're extending what an NFT means and can be used for. And we can get into more on like how that actually works in terms of building on Stacks and Bitcoin.
NFT stuff has come across my desk increasingly over the last several months, 6 months, and it's almost been kind of nauseating in a way. And there's the same old storylines over and over again. And then there's also all sorts of technical issues, like the JPEG that is the NFT isn't even hosted on the blockchain itself. And I think a lot of people are essentially buying pet rocks. I have other questions too about NFTs. There's so many of them, and I guess this could be said also of tokens generally, that how much of this is a product of the easy money environment in which we find ourselves. There was $6 trillion printed last year, and a lot of these NFTs aren't even like hosted on a blockchain. They're not actually decentralized. And I know there's a lot of work to have that completed. There's Polygon and some other solutions that have been worked on the Ethereum network, where you're supposed to be able to hold the JPEG or the art on the blockchain itself. But generally speaking, often times it's simply just been a link to a JPEG that's hosted on a central server. Best case scenario, you might get IPFS or otherwise. So furthermore, I try not to be too toxic about it, but I am somewhat of a Bitcoin maximalist. I think that there's a lot of benefits of Bitcoin, namely its security. For instance, I think that's one of the underlying themes that we see amongst those who are arguing for DeFi apps on Bitcoin. So could you kind of maybe speak more to the functionality and that's made possible in terms of NFTs on Bitcoin, either of you?
Yeah. So like maybe back to your earlier question too, like the challenges, naturally in Bitcoin is we know Bitcoin has won, I think, the argument for, sound money, most valuable asset. But inherently Bitcoin can't store data. It's not going to store decentralized data, files, things of that nature. And so you need something like a side chain or a layer 2 that can actually do that. And I think that the data ownership aspect is equally as important as sound money, as we've seen recently You have Pomp getting banned by YouTube. You have these kind of Web 2.0, tech stack and Rails that, Bitcoin can't necessarily solve for. Like good incentives, but it can't solve for. And so like our hope with stacks and the NFTs is that this NFT is, the way we're really positioning this is that it's really kind of extending the use case of what an NFT. And I would agree that, there's, I think, a lot of fluff and probably, a lot of people that got in way early in, Bitcoin, Ethereum, all these other chains. And they've bought up a lot of these NFT projects to kind of give you this, I would say kind of a fake market to a degree of what these things are really valued at. But I do think that we can help, properly extend the use case of Bitcoin, and that is by way of stacks. And so like we're making these NFTs as more of a attractive way for the masses to get orange pilled. It's like if you want to get into Bitcoin today, right, you have to either go on an exchange and a wallet. And like while that's pretty attractive for us, the maxis and the people that are in the space, like the masses, are only going to be able to buy so much. People don't have thousands of dollars laying around, right? So we're trying to say is, can we create NFT, which is a very I would say something that a lot of the people can easily think of, like, okay, I've heard of NFT. I'm making this kind of cool avatar is what we say, where we're making your own digital version of yourself, and you're going to get compensated in Bitcoin by taking control of your data and taking it back from this kind of Web 2.0 world. So it's really what we're trying to facilitate is this like user-owned internet and getting sound money out of it. And this is all layered on top of Bitcoin. And I can definitely talk more to how Stacks does that and how we think that's the best solution. But I would say that Stacks is definitely the way to go for, I think, enabling that on top of Bitcoin.
Of course, Stacks is formerly Blockstack, and they've been working on essentially a Web3 solution, or at least a decentralized internet solution. And I think this is one of the biggest discussions that we actually as an industry should be speaking about are the issues with Web 2, with the World Wide Web. I mean, it's in the name, World Wide Web of your information. So furthermore, while it is a network of networks, it is in many ways centralized. I think we saw with Facebook, the possibilities there. That's a major outage that Facebook suffered, and it was out for a very long time. They're connected to the Internet of Things, I believe, which actually exacerbated their problems, which is a commentary on centralization. So maybe if you guys want to speak more about Web3 generally and why you guys are pursuing it.
Yeah, so I could probably say something quick, then let you chime in. And I think the big thing that we're trying to usher in with Web3 is like, again, to your point, we know that the kind of existing freemium model of the internet right now is broken. Like everyone knows the common saying that, if a product's free, you are the product. And that what has come with that is that you don't have control of your data, and you don't have, really control over your experiences on the internet unless you use, a VPN, but then you lose the benefits of getting, a personalized experience or, other things of that nature that your data could facilitate. And so with like Web 3.0 and what Stacks is doing specifically is really, I think, enabling like the easiest onboarding ramp for people to come into the space and start at least getting a taste of what that actual online digital footprint and experience can be like with a lot of these Stacks app. And right now, Stacks apps and platforms are still fairly focused on DeFi and NFTs, but that's where I think we are uniquely positioned is like, hey, we're really focusing on the data that you've created over gosh, maybe even 2 decades, with the World Wide Web, and we're allowing you to port this into a Web 3.0 future. Help us build it. Help us, usher in this new age of tech. That you are a part of a user-owned internet, and I think that's what aligns us with Stacks so well, is because they do provide NFTs, they do provide DeFi, they do provide Bitcoin, yield for stacking. They do provide, marketplaces. There's, just all these other possibilities that Stacks enables. And again, it all settles and inherits Bitcoin's, underlying security and, benefits. So I think like that's the biggest thing that we're trying to, I would say convey to people with Stacks and Web 3.0 is like, if you want a better future, you got to join together and be a part of it. And Bitcoin is kind of that, carrot, but also the thing I think that breaks the mold from Web 2.0.
Yeah, ultimately for me, like Web3 is about censorship resistant at the kind of application level, just as Bitcoin is censorship resistance at the sort of base monetary level. However, in engaging with these various applications, be they podcasts or social media networks or whatever the case may be, all of that requires data, right? Of course, and we also shouldn't shy away from the fact that digital commerce is a good thing. Like voluntary transactions create value for society, and so we shouldn't just sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater, but rather, as we're thinking through these, decentralized applications, these censorship resistant applications, what is the right kind of data layer that feeds and allows participants to interact in a sovereign manner, in a highly privacy kind of safe manner as well. That's sort of the piece we're going after.
And so you guys think that Bitcoin is that global layer?
I think it's the global layer, but it's also the great, like we've never had an incentive, I think, that could be this strong to like, one, get our users, everyday consumers to try to do what we're trying to, enable them to do. But also, I think as Jeff Booth likes to properly say, Bitcoin is like the one thing that can help us transition, from this monetary policy. I think Bitcoin can also be that key incentive that does it from a, World Wide Web 2.0 to a Web 3.0 stack. Like that'll be the incentive or the carrot, if you will.
Yeah, Bitcoin, I think, is the ledger of truth. Like it is the only blockchain that exists that can truly say it's decentralized in the face of really any kind of attack vector, right? There's a lot of blockchains that kind of masquerade as being decentralized when you think about node count or geographic dispersion of nodes, all this good stuff. But at the end of the day, there just isn't anything else like Bitcoin that has had this very path dependent birth out of the wild, right? That has kind of bootstrapped its existence. And so that, for us at least, has to be the base layer. Now, of course, we could get into some pretty compelling arguments about what the right way to build on top of that is. You mentioned RSK, at the outset, which we have a lot of respect for, and Sovereign, which is using the RSK sort of blockchain in this kind of peg in, peg out process, versus something like Stacks, which has gone with its kind of standalone blockchain that inherently settles on Bitcoin via their consensus mechanism of proof of transfer. And we believe there's pros and cons there, but ultimately we firmly believe Bitcoin is that foundation. There's really just nothing else that's kind of worth building on.
And another thing I would say too is like the reason that we specifically chose Bitcoin and thus, also found Stacks is, I think a point that Ian, you like to make often is that, there has been other attempts at, similar blends and cuts of this. But again, Bitcoin is the most attractive and I think, sound way of doing this. There's, people are probably familiar with, Brave browser, and their BAT token. And there's some other exchanges out there that have, gone and done a little bit of what we're doing in terms of enabling users to try to aggregate their data and then sell it for something. But the carrot for them or the incentive is very unappealing because it's probably, a token no one's ever heard of, doesn't have much value. And so like, why am I going to do it? And overall, just from, our research and review, a lot of these platforms too, just the tech stack itself is, kind of clunky, if you will, for a user. Like there's no real stickiness or reason to kind of come back and like just stand alone. If I see Bitcoin, I've got the not the name brand, but I've got the branding of Bitcoin inherently, the awareness, and just again everything that comes around, comes with Bitcoin in general. So I think that's a technical difference as well as what we can provide, by using and leveraging Bitcoin.
Munib Ali at Stacks has been working on internet solutions since pre-Bitcoin and blockchain. And I spoke with him on a GoldSilverBitcoin podcast episode, and he noted that because of Bitcoin, the web has property rights. People own their own stuff. We can directly own cryptocurrencies. We've got smart contracts and Web3 applications. They are derivatives of property. He actually slices the evolution of the internet into two epochs, before digital property and after digital property. The Crypto 2.0 community, the harbinger of which is the Bitcoin blockchain, defined digital property rights. Said Ali, crypto then merged with the web to give you Web 3.0. So he argues that essentially like a future internet, Web 3, could be built on Bitcoin. Do you guys have any now? Do you agree with this? And then furthermore, like, why is Bitcoin superior, especially in the realm of NFTs? Maybe Ian, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so I mean, we have a lot of respect for Munib. Obviously, we're deeply immersed in the Stacks ecosystem, and by virtue of that immersion, we've been able to actually see this start to come to life. The Stacks 2.0 sort of launch was earlier this year, and so we're only 9-ish months, after that, and the diverse range of companies, developers that are building on Stacks, building all sorts of things, survey services, true DeFi, borrowing and lending, margin trading, some of these financial primitives that you inevitably want as part of any ecosystem, and many, many others. And so you're starting to see a full and proper ecosystem forming. And so we very much believe that what Munib said is true because it is unfolding before our eyes. And by extension of his comments around property rights, I think that goes directly to your question around, NFTs. If an NFT and again, going back to the comments earlier, completely agree. There's a ton of kind of exuberance and sort of froth, in these markets. But at the end of the day, we should think about an NFT really as nothing more than helping codify those digital property rights, as you just mentioned. And so if that's true, then we want that token that's representing these property rights to be anchored into the most stable, sort of purposefully unchanging or slow changing kind of rigorous foundation that is Bitcoin, just as you would with any sort of property right.
Any thoughts, Stephen?
I would say probably maybe a little slightly different angle of response to it, but I would say I 100% agree. I think this was like a more recent kind of realization, but I think that Bitcoin in terms of like Web 3.0, in order to bring about this as a realization, like actually bring in Web 3.0, I think you're going to have a time preference, which Bitcoin enables you. If you have that as an asset, it changes your time preference, right? In Web 3.0, I don't think people fully look at it through the lens of what Web 3.0 can be. And if you're using Bitcoin as that value of exchange, then it makes you think further. It makes you think into the future. And like Web 2.0, I think is unfortunately built to look in the past. Everything you do on these social media platforms today, which is the bulk of it, to be honest, it makes you think about going and posting something and then having other people look at it, or you're going in and just kind of mindlessly scrolling through things. You're not really living in the present or really thinking about the future. And I think if you can actually start getting value from the actual data that you create, which we would say is your property, everything you do on these platforms today and services today is something that you create. You should own it. And if you're getting compensated for it and something that is valuable and makes you start thinking about the future, changing your time preference, I think that's a different angle that I'd like to see a little more discussed in the Bitcoin and just Web 3.0 space, because a lot of people they're like, cool, Web 3.0, what does that mean? I kind of know what it is, but like, give me a good example, or how can I truly benefit and start getting some experiences in it? Because I know it's early stages and days still, but I think that's something that we want to kind of really hone in on, that people are being abused, their data's kind of everywhere, they have no control. There's a lot of studies on the negative effects of social media. Bitcoin helps transition to this and makes you start thinking a little more towards the future in a more healthier way. And this is what Web 3.0 promises.
And it makes sense with what Ian said, that it seems to be the most stable, most purposely unchanging platform out there. There's governance issues on Bitcoin, but I think we're seeing increasingly governance issues creep to the surface on other alternatives such as Ethereum. I think when people think about Web3, they generally speak about Ethereum. Ethereum kind of staked their flag on the Web 3.0 moon, if you will. But the Stacks thesis is that we shouldn't discount Bitcoin in Web3. So from the podcast I did earlier with Munib, he said essentially that next generation internet, commonly called Web3, will emerge on top of blockchains. What's not clear right now is which blockchain design works the best. Quote, that's where you're seeing a lot of experimentation with different projects trying to propose different types of designs. You can't discount Bitcoin from the entire Web3 ecosystem. It is by far the most secure blockchain. There are network effects, as well. Most people get introduced to cryptocurrencies through Bitcoin, and projects like Lightning are innovating on top of Bitcoin. Ali says products like Blockstack or Stacks now can anchor Web3 with Bitcoin. That might be the sustainable path to Web3 development. As users start moving away from Web2, we realize how the underlying technology to enable cryptocurrencies is the same as the technology that enables Web3 apps. Users can own digital currencies and internet assets, which might be an NFT, with similar private keys. The artificial line between money and data disappears, and a unified digital society emerges. Bitcoin is the reserve currency of this society, and smart contracts and Web3 apps anchor to the security of Bitcoin. So, Stephen, do you have any reactions to that?
True. It's just, I mean, done. I mean, that, I think the market's just proving itself. Like, I'm not going to, I mean, given like I think all three of us, and obviously many of the people who listen to this podcast, we're very much Bitcoin maxis. I think Bitcoin will win in the end. I don't think there will be much competition, but I think you're seeing the market play out. Like, there's a reason why Twitter is adopting a Bitcoin tip. There's a reason why there's a Bitcoin ETF. Like, there's a reason why Bitcoin is the one being adopted. Like, the market is the one that is going to speak. And I'm not going to go and say that they're the entire ecosystem, blockchain and crypto in general. I do think there's some scams out there, and there's some things that have been just way oversold. Ethereum being one of them. I mean, it's like it seems broken. I don't know what they're really going to do about that, and they're taking it in the, I would say, wrong direction. But I do think there's solid products or projects out there that are still attempting to solve like very real problems, which again, like Bitcoin can't exactly solve for. Stacks is a huge part of that, but maybe just to name a few real quick, like we were looking at this from the decentralized kind of data storage and network, if you will, and I think there's stuff out there like IPFS. There's actual platform called Storage. Filecoin maybe a little different, but there's other problems out there that blockchain and decentralization can solve for. But the more closely it's coupled and built on Bitcoin, it's like just how are you going to beat that? And all these other products and cryptos out there that are claiming to do X, Y, and Z. It's like, cool, Stacks already does all of that and it works. Like, none of these other tokens have even figured their stuff out yet, and Stacks is already just kind of flying under the radar, if you will, and doing everything as described.
Ian, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something embedded in what Munib said and Stephen alluded to, which is that there's a lot of experimentation happening across a lot of different areas as it relates to scalability, as it relates to really extending censorship resistance to as many arenas as we possibly can within this kind of digital ecosystem. And so that is how I often like to think about these other blockchains, right? It's a incredibly diverse set of experiments that are running in real time before our eyes. And as Stephen said, the market's ultimately going to determine what technologies provide solutions. There's things like roll-ups. There's things like zero-knowledge proofs that are being discussed across the landscape, not just within a particular blockchain, but across many. And so these are elements that I think are inevitably going to make it into whatever ultimate solution there is. And we could also debate about the idea that we will inevitably have a kind of multi-chain world. I suspect we probably will, because there will still be communities built around some of these blockchains, but they may kind of fall off from where they are now. So I ultimately think that experimentation idea that was referred to multiple times is exactly right. And my hypothesis, or where I'm placing my bet, is that whatever experiments kind of win and solve real problems will ultimately make its way into an ecosystem that still has Bitcoin as its core, as its foundation. Because it doesn't matter how much kind of novelty you have in these various methods, if they're not backed by something that is ultimately secure, that's a huge consideration.
Yeah, and I would say maybe one other thing too is I think like the reassurance of maybe like consistency is what Bitcoin provides, and Stacks, it's just by nature of the tech stack too. They have the smart contracting language Clarity, which is, deterministic. We know exactly what the outcome is. A is A. Bitcoin, sound, you've never had all these, issues that all these other chains have had. So there's a level of like de-risking kind of the future, I would say, by building on Bitcoin, just because the nature of, what we've seen over the last decade. And Stacks inherently, also provides that with the tech stack that they're providing, is that, it's less risky to build on other ones versus Stacks and Bitcoin.
Yeah, the settlement assurances, right?
Yeah.
When we're dealing with property rights, you want the strongest settlement assurances. And the way Stacks has built their technology is a transaction on Stacks that ultimately sells on Bitcoin means that to unravel that, that action on Stacks is equally as difficult as unraveling Bitcoin, which is an incredibly monumentally, stupendously difficult sort of task. And so that's another way to think about going back to that property right framework.
And I don't think this has changed, but the way in which Stacks works is that the design uses Bitcoin's proof of work to launch new blockchains while allowing participants to earn Bitcoin for consensus participation, ecosystem developer funds, and incentives for specific players. So this is via what was once called proof of transfer, POX. I imagine they're still using that. POX enables smart contract languages such as Clarity to leverage Bitcoin security without any modification to Bitcoin, and developers to create new POX blockchains using the security properties of Bitcoin. Blockstack or Stacks could have started a new proof of work blockchain, says Ali. They chose otherwise. Bitcoin is already here, he said. It has been here for 10 plus years now. It is by far the most secure proof of work blockchain. When looking at the hash rate of Bitcoin, it is hard to attack Bitcoin. It can be viewed as a reserve cryptocurrency. Do you have, either of you, any final comments for now on Web3 and Bitcoin?
Again, I think he hits the nail on the head.
It's
there's
hard to beat many.
Yeah, it's just like, that's why I again hope that the Bitcoin, community really embraces Stacks. Like, I'm fully, I think there's going to be flavors. Like, there's nothing wrong as long as it's anchored to Bitcoin and, not some, true scam or something, like, which Stacks is not. I just don't see how, you just don't flock towards it. Just all the benefits are there. There's less risk. So I just think, yeah, Web 3.0 more than likely is going to have a, it's very specific value, exchange of value, and it's more than likely going to be Bitcoin, as we're already seeing with, several platforms, and I imagine many more over the next, coming years.
Yeah, speaking of Munib, we've of course seen, some very interesting kind of Twitter back and forth between him and Adam Back in particular over the last, week or so. And I think that not only raised awareness within the community of Stacks, it also led to some, kind of contentious back and forth. And I think one argument is that, well, do you really need the standalone Stacks token, which is serving as that kind of utility token, paying the gas fees? And I think there's a very valid argument, against that, and against certainly the idea of a pre-mine. But at the same time, if we look at the proof in the pudding in terms of how that, because of that incentive, how the network's been able to kind of bootstrap itself into the, just unbelievable range of companies, developers, technologies that are all now building on the Stacks ecosystem. I think the proof sort of points to at least some kind of consideration for that type of approach. Now, I personally hope that we'll see Bitcoin become ever more natively tied within Stacks, meaning one day you might eventually be able to pay gas fees for computational work done by a smart contract with sats, right? And so that starts to get very, very kind of interesting. But at the end of the day, I think, what the design choices that Stacks, took, especially with the standalone token, and the way it was sort of originally issued, what's sort of done is done. And I think I think the community is going to see what's possible with this approach. And of course, as Stephen pointed out, we will likely see evolution to this, right? This is probably not the final form, and that's what's beautiful about the programmability of things like Stacks.
And RSK2 chose that a token as well in order to perhaps align us incentives, as tokens are probably best at doing in a decentralized community. So Ian, I guess talking about Bitcoin and NFTs. We've touched on a lot of this, I think, but I want to touch on it maybe again in the context of specifically NFTs. Like, why is Bitcoin a better platform than the alternatives for non-fungible tokens?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the property right discussion. You're going to see NFTs. Right now we think of like JPEGs of rocks, and I think it's valid to kind of point at that and say like, really, guys, what are we doing? But you're ultimately going to see NFTs and sort of tokens codifying all sorts of different property rights. You're going to see the digitization of a lot of areas of our lives that are currently still very analog and paper based. You think about closing on a house, you think about different property in the physical world, whose property rights can validly be extended in the digital realm, and create a much better experience for all sort of participants. And so the point is, this is not going away. This is not sort of a fad. You're going to see NFTs expand more and more in terms of different property rights that they're codifying. And it's just, what do you want? What sort of ledger, right? If we say a ledger is nothing more than saying who owns what, like, how robust do you want that ledger to be for your property, especially when we start talking about not just JPEGs, right? But like really kind of big things beyond that. You want that ledger to be immutable. You want it to be indestructible. You want it to be self-preserving. You want it to be censorship resistant. All these kind of great traits, and that comes back to Bitcoin being able to kind of check all those boxes. And what Stacks ultimately does is, again, settles each of those transactions down to the Bitcoin chain. And so if I transfer property rights for whatever it is from myself to Steven, that action is hashed and written into a Bitcoin block. And so there's this sort of immutable proof that that transfer has occurred, and no one can change it. Or they could at least try, but they would have to, again, unroll and reorg the Bitcoin chain, which is just, incredibly difficult.
Anything to add to that, Stephen?
No, I just think that, yeah, coming back to maybe more what uniquely that we do and are trying to provide with NFTs is, again, I think we're really trying to broaden the range and, what NFTs are really, applicable to. Again, most people just think of right now as, some creative set of artwork, with a limited amount of, releases, if you will, or instances of this artwork that you can go and claim. And what we are really doing is kind of twofold on the user side. Again, it's this on-ramp for people to, achieve data sovereignty and earn Bitcoin for an asset that they create somewhat passively. But, in the NFT space specifically, like, we're trying to get people to be in a spot where they can be more kind of creative too. Like, you are actually the one creating your own NFT, again, versus going in and just buying a, one instance of this collection or something that's maybe randomly generated or whatever, but like, you're actually taking part in the creative process and the additive process of, again, starting to represent, other things instead of a JPEG, which is, if you just kind of imagine this kind of abstracted layer, like, yes, we have the NFT angle of this, but below it, there's a lot of different data sets and assets that we're tying and connecting to this NFT that the NFT represents. So you can think of in like a Web 3.0 world, and again, there's some other projects and technologies that do this, but just going to a site or something, it's going to curate that experience for you based off your set of data and your ID. No longer are you just going to have some audience-based level. It could be hyper-targeted and relevant to you. So you are getting a curated experience, or at least seeing, our goal is, seeing an ad that's relevant to you or something, and you're getting compensated for it. It could even be, again, just the pure data ownership aspect of it, like self-sovereign data ownership. There's a lot of things that I think an NFT can do, and you're seeing some other projects out there in terms of like making NFTs more livable and customizable. They're not just kind of this set in stone thing. You can actually have live, customizable, editable NFTs, which is something we're looking at. But again, I think just like expanding and focusing on having users come in a more attractive and being a part of the creative growth of the NFT market on Bitcoin and Stacks is really what we're trying to do. And again, that's tying it to pulling your data in, owning it in a more attractive and appealing way than other platforms have done. But I just want to kind of make that point that that's really, I think our angle and where we fit in nicely, given some of the other Stacks projects and other Bitcoin, projects as well.
And ultimately building that asset in a way that can generate ongoing income. This is a very different kind of model than today, which Steven's alluding to, which, here's a collection that has 10,000 items and, you buy it and, maybe hope to resell it, or maybe you just really love it and you want to kind of collect it. But this brings this brings a very different dimension to what an NFT can do for the user in terms of kind of monetary benefit.
And also from the business and brands perspective too, like this is like the other side. I mean, we're a marketplace, so like you have, the NFT angle is supposed to be the truest, version of you and everything again that is kind of, connected to your NFT. But, Web 3.0 is supposed to be very, user consent based. This is permission by the user. And a lot of these businesses and brands are going to need an on-ramp as well. As you see, this cookieless future, cookies are going away, all these tracking methods that are going on in the background, all these entities that just trade data back and forth and don't really provide you value. So you're going to have this first party, free market solution that we're providing with Sovereign Society, which is something I think that Bitcoin and Stacks community alike and everybody in general would want to see built, versus something that is more of like, sure, it's maybe ushered in some and pressured some of these businesses, brands to do it, but you have, government led initiatives, which could be like, a GDPR, California Privacy Act, things like that, that are, mandating companies doing this thing. I'd much rather see a free market solution do it, and obviously much rather see it built on Bitcoin than anything else. So I think like that's another very big differentiator that we ourselves have and no one else has.
So NFTs, I think, are the biggest cultural phenomenon, crypto cultural phenomenon since Bitcoin. They go beyond Ethereum. They've captured the popular imagination. The Los Angeles Dodgers gave out a crypto bobblehead last year, or it was in 2019 actually. And now that thing is probably the only one of the only souvenirs in history to, like, within 2 years, like, exponentially gain value like it has. Perhaps some from the 50s or et cetera are collector's items at this point. But here we are 2 years later. And whereas you got the crypto bobblehead for free for a Dodgers ticket, $15, $20 you could have spent on it. Now, I mean, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't. They're going on eBay for, like, I don't know. I'm not sure what they're being auctioned off at, but I'm looking, they were $75 for a while. Now they're at like $1,500. So I think this is the biggest cultural phenomenon since Bitcoin in terms of crypto, more than Ethereum, et cetera. So I guess, do you guys have any comments on NFTs generally and what they've met? Steven?
It's hard because we are so early. And I mean, like, even a year from now, we're going to look at different use cases that no one is even talking about right now. And so, but it is clear, like, it's hard to disentangle the kind of true, what I might call true demand versus speculative demand, right? It's very tough to disentangle those two forces. But just from studying this for a little while now, I think what's clear to us, at least, is that there is real, there's real demand. There's real demand, and it's, and if you frame it in a similar way as kind of Bitcoin's path, often starting as a collectible, right, without any kind of monetary value. It's just like collecting something because you like it, and then ultimately it has a monetary value to it, and then ultimately it can do other things. And so I think we're seeing that progression, and it's hard to even kind of predict what we'll see next. But my estimate would be the next big phase is going to be going from what has been this initial use case around artistic collections. And by the way, that's going to continue. You're going to continue to see royalties getting programmatically attached to NFTs. And so when I buy a piece from an artist's collection and I resell that, the artist gets programmatically, through smart contracts, will get a portion of that value. And you could think of how that could extend to all sorts of creators, whether you're a podcaster or you do YouTube videos or whatever the case is. I think we're going to see the expansion from that sort of vertical into other verticals, and that's ultimately going to include the sort of bridge between physical property and the digital codification of those property rights for that physical item in cyberspace.
I think we've in some ways jumped right into the deep end here today. Talked a lot about maybe some more, I guess, technical topics such as Web3. We went into stacks. We kind of examined stacks a little bit. So let's kind of like tread on over to the shallow end and kind of get real basic here. So I'm just curious from a real like simple perspective, what is sovereign society?
Yeah, so essentially we're a data marketplace connecting buyers and consumers or owners of data. And so really what we're all looking to do right now is enable everyday users, the masses broadly, to aggregate and have influence over how their data is monetized. There's nothing we'll ever be able to do about, your data that sits out there on, all these different sites and, this kind of, again, like you said, Web 2.0 world. What we're hoping is that we'll, allow you this easy ramp to port in to a Web 3.0 world in a very easy manner.
Anything to add to that, Ian?
No, I think a very common follow-up question to that is, okay, fine, I can see why individuals would want to monetize their data. And by the way, we're by no means the first to think about that. There's many kind of attempts that we believe have failed to gain broad traction for a variety of reasons. But I think for most folks, it's pretty clear that, okay, if my data is worth, X per year, anything that can allow me to capture that in a relatively passive, and in the case of integrating NFTs, engaging way, like that's, that becomes a little, that becomes pretty clear. But a lot of folks will then ask the follow-up question of like, well, who's gonna buy, who's gonna want that data? Well, it turns out a lot of, entities, when you think of all the pieces that Stephen was alluding to earlier around this kind of existential moment in the realm of digital marketing, with third-party cookies that will largely be, gone. I think Google has kind of moved back their date, perhaps not surprisingly, for when that will actually occur. But you will now have advertisers selling goods and services who desperately need alternatives to these historically invasive methods of collecting data about us. And so, there's huge demand for novel first-party, data sources, and being able to kind of go direct to the source, if you will. It's, kind of fully consented. And the nice part about making the individual the sort of anchor point and owner of their data is that they're able to aggregate data not just from a particular silo like YouTube or like Google or like Facebook, but rather to cut across those different platforms in a way that creates this more holistic profile than what they've cobbled together today, which is, really inaccurate at best. And so those are some of the areas for why buyers would be quite, interested in what we're building.
So I haven't seen this approach taken with data monetization. It's been a theme I've seen. There's been like notions of like apps that people can have and maybe earn back on as their data is monetized. So why do you think NFT is a better approach to this problem?
Yeah, again, it goes back to what is something that an everyday person can, easily relate to or compare to. Like NFT is, I'm not saying it's an easy term, but again, most people have heard of it. Again, the part that we are making very different is that you're not just going in and having to buy one. Like you're basically doing what, again, you would create is a avatar of yourself. Just namely to start is actually a Guy Fawkes avatar. So everybody can have their own Guy Fawkes mask, customize it, and you can immediately understand that, this is the type of branding and approach tone we're going for. We want to have an impact on the world. We're going to do this together in numbers. But you go into the app, automatically launches the front-facing camera, and it'll apply this like AR, VR face sticker over top of you, and you can go and actually be a part of the creative process. And that is a much, easier, thing to grasp, for the everyday person. Like, okay, I can launch an app, make my own NFT, maybe make some money. I don't know. Oh, I can also take control of my data and add value to my NFT over time. But I'm doing this thing that I've done before in Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook. No one's, it's obviously many people have done that before. But I think it's just providing that easy to connect way to get the masses to be orange pilled. Provide them something attractive to earn and do something, that's creative and something that, again, very easy to do, that they've, it's not a new learning process. And then just the second piece I'll say to that is like adding the data component to it. What Ian said about these kind of, we have these sets of data that, not to get into too much detail as we build it, but we're going and enabling the user to do, all completely legal, and big tech has kind of shot themselves in the foot. But this data sets that we are going to enable them to go and get and aggregate is far more detailed than anything that has been out there before. Like no one has access to this data because Facebook doesn't want you to have, or they don't want to give it to the buyers of this data. But they have to make it literally easy for you as the user to go and port it, or I'll say export it, and then import it into our platform. And I think that's the whole idea of really, again, making an NFT's use case a little more applicable and expanding it beyond, again, just a simple JPEG.
What else do people need to know about sovereign society?
Sign up. We want to get as many people in. The first 10,000 users, once we do launch, we'll get a very customized, unique, personalized set of I'll say customizations and things that they can apply to their avatar. And hey, if you want to make money, we are talking with buyers. We know that buyers are interested in this data. So if you bring the data, people are willing to pay for it. Again, especially as Ian said, with these other methods going out, the buyers are going to have no choice. Like this solution is going to come about, one way or another, and a free market solution with the actual users being a part of the market, I think is the best. So if you want to go visit, right now it's www.sovsoc.io, sovsoc.io, get early access, sign up, and then we'll update you when we go live, which is, again, hopefully going to be in Q1 of next year. But I would say, yeah, sign up, spread the word. And if you're a buyer and interested in this data, you can go there, sign up as well. We're talking with many and would love to talk with any buyers.
And be on the lookout as well. We'll be spinning up a Discord server and all sorts of kind of community fun. So stay tuned. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you as well if you have thoughts or feedback or want to be involved, etc.
I think at Bitcoin 2021, we saw a philosophy that had remained intact in the Bitcoin community since its start. There's some arguments that Bitcoin, or that Satoshi Nakamoto was inspired by Austrian economics, hence the cap of 21 million, as opposed to an inflationary currency such as the fiat currencies of today. I think there's a lot of notions of individual sovereignty with Bitcoin. Of course, you can be your own bank. It's emphasizing the individual, which historically stems from classical philosophy, Western philosophy. Really, Bitcoin, as Patrick Byrne has argued, is the continuation of classic liberalism as opposed to social liberalism. And classic liberalism might also today be referred to as libertarianism as well. So I'm kind of curious, in your guys' mind, Ian, we'll start with Ian, like what is a sovereign society, philosophically speaking?
Yeah, you hit on a lot of points there that I think we very deeply, connect with and subscribe to philosophically. I mean, ultimately, the individual is the smallest minority, right? And there is no other kind of reason-based way to derive rights and property rights other than with the individual as that lens. Like it just does not make sense to kind of we could voluntarily agree to own a particular piece of property, but these kind of notions of groups of individuals really have no basis in reality, right? And so it ultimately does all come down to the individual. And I think what a sovereign society looks like is one in which you, the individual, own the fruits of your labor, first and foremost. And very importantly is that kind of monetary layer that prevents what is essentially theft of your time, via inflation and debasement of money that we're otherwise forced to use, right? But it also extends into, well, what else do you own? What else? What are the other fruits of your labor? And what are the other things that are an extension of yourself, such as data? And so for me, I think maybe the succinct way to put it is a sovereign society is one in which the individual truly owns the fruits of his or her labor and can freely exchange those elements with other individuals in a way in which entities cannot suppress, they cannot censor what I trade with another individual. They cannot block me. They cannot tell me what I can and can't do with my, with my property. I could probably go on and on, but I'll pass the torch over to Steve.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, just be in a position for, the individual, again, to be empowered. Like if we are literally anchoring both Bitcoin and data to the individual and kind of doing this, again, I would maybe not say like eating the system from the inside out or under their nose, but like if you can give those two, kind of key assets to the individual and make it extremely difficult for anyone to ever tamper or, manipulate or actually, hinder you from using them, you give power back to the people. And I think that's literally, what a sovereign society is individuals being able to act freely, as long as you're obviously not, causing harm to others. I think everyone would agree with that. Yeah, just a, free movement, fluid ability to fluidly move between systems, services, communicating, whatever, no censorship. You're just free to do what you want.
To paraphrase Friedrich Hayek, what did he say? We will never have good money again until we take the thing out of the hands of government. All we can hope is that we introduce something that can do it by some sly roundabout way. I'm again paraphrasing, and of course Bitcoin meets that in terms of separating money from state. And I think there's an extension of that same kind of parable when it comes to something like data, right? All we can do is introduce some means in some sly roundabout way to take our data out of the hands of, in this case, not the government as well, but also, big tech, et cetera.
I would say too, maybe a bit of a, not a re-education, but again, back to maybe that time preference. I would hope an outcome of, sovereign society too, is that people have the time to actually, again, enjoy the fruits of their labor and grow. Because a lot of the people, unfortunately, globally just don't have the time to do that. Their time is taken, given, one, the nature of their money, labor, money and being devalued, time is taken away. And then also just the tech stack that we're built on, tech is obviously readily available for a lot of people, internet access, but a lot of people just can't, take the time or, have the ability to go and educate themselves and grow and earn more and things of that nature. So I would hope that sovereign society, either directly or indirectly, that is a big outcome, is that people, again, can get their time back and, personally grow, both, mentally, physically, whatever.
So I want to read a couple quotes, I guess, and get your reactions. I guess the first one is from Eric Voorhees, and this adds upon what Ian had mentioned earlier. He says essentially that the separation of money and state is the new separation of church and state. He says, quote, "We all grew up in school, most of us sadly in public school, but nevertheless, we learn about this thing that happened hundreds of years ago, which was the separation of church and state. We learn why that was so important that humans used to live. We learn why that was so important that humans used to live in society under which their religion, something very personal and precious to them as individuals, was under the management of an organization that could control those things. They could tell you what to worship and how, when, and why. Somehow society realized perhaps that was unethical, that we shouldn't permit control of something so personal and important to your life to be controlled by the state." Any reactions to that?
I just think it's like impossible to overstate the importance and implications of what it would mean to separate money from state. Like impossible. And I think there's a lot of deep, very, critical thinkers in this space that have started to paint that picture. But I think the implications and follow-on effects and knock-on effects of this, kind of to what Stephen was saying, are going to cascade in a way that dramatically benefits civilization in a way that perhaps we've never seen, right, in the history of humanity. If you really look at this and you really kind of go down the rabbit hole and look at the history of how money has been manipulated and abused by some at the expense of others, it really is the single force from which many, I won't say all, but many of the sort of ills we see in society stem from. And so therein lies the mantra, fix the money, fix the world. I think it's just impossible to to fully anticipate what that will mean, but I think it's going to be glorious.
Another quote from Henry Hazlitt. He said, inflation is the opium of the people. He was an editor at the New York Times, I believe in the 70s, an Austrian economist. He wrote a book called Economics in One Lesson. And one of you mentioned, I think it was Stephen Jeffrey Booth, and he talks about the importance of deflation. And Hazlitt wrote about inflation that, quote, it discourages all prudence and thrift. It encourages squandering, gambling, reckless waste of all kinds. It often makes it more profitable to speculate on NFTs maybe than to produce. It tears apart the whole fabric of stable economic relationships. Its inexcusable injustices drive men towards desperate remedies. It plants the seeds of fascism and communism. It leads men to demand totalitarian controls. It ends invariably in bitter disillusion and collapse. Any reactions to that?
All right. Yeah, I mean, this kind of gets back to maybe my wish of the outcome for what sovereign society is, which is, a better educated society. Not saying that, they're uneducated, but again, I would say the root of all of our problems, or at least like 95% of them is the money. Tech is obviously a huge, influence today, but, all the arguments we have right now and today, like right now we're arguing about the debt ceiling. We're talking about the first thing that ever got me kind of into this, when I found Ron Paul and kind of the in the Fed route, I was, I was like, why is it that the minimum wage has to go up? Why is it that the money that they were, originally paid is no longer good? But yet that's what we're arguing about. We're like, the minimum wage should be $15 an hour or $20 an hour. And it's like, that's not even the, argument we should be having. We should be talking about, why is the money worthless? Why is the money bad? And, that those conversations just get, muddied in the water between social media giants today, things of that nature. I think you fix the money, you fix a lot of the problems. And again, if you can get people to understand, and maybe another thing too is just like we're in our early 30s, just freshly turned it, but in our lifetime, we've never had the capability to go and save money. Like, I mean, you can save it, in nominal terms, but it's like, go put your money in a high yield checking account or something, on, I forget some of the, ones that offer it today, but, you'll get like not even 1%, cool. Now you're only losing 5 or 6% of your money. So like it incentivizes literally people to go and wastefully spend, go and enjoy, like you said, things in a drunken stupor, or, do something that just is not a very, good time preference to have. It just leads to a lot of, I'll say, other things that are not the actual root causes of our problems, and the discussions lie there. And therefore, we live in this world that I just think is not a fairy tale, but I think I would say maybe the standard of living we have today has been, given to us on borrowed time. We've done all this via credit. It's not on a sound system. We're all just waiting for it to unfortunately collapse. And that's why I want Bitcoin there, because to Jeff Booth's point, that's the only thing that would transition us out of this unfortunate, rat's nest of a monetary system that we have. So I think that's probably the key takeaway I would have for that one.
I love how Ron Paul's like the godfather of Bitcoin and he doesn't even know it. He
Bro,
like
we spent for a whole hour at the conference. Yeah, it was wild.
Yeah, he like shows up and he's just like, all right, I guess I'll go to this Bitcoin conference. And he gets like a standing ovation. We're like, thank you.
It's 50 years of doing it over and over again.
Yeah. Great. Well, we've had the distinct privilege of sitting down with Stephen Dodge and Ian Major, co-founders of Sovereign Society. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
No problem. Greatly appreciate
Thanks for
you
having us, Justin. It was great discussion.
And thank you everyone for listening. Thanks for watching the show. I hope you enjoyed it. Head on over to GoldSilverBitcoin.com, where we have a store where we're selling precious metals. If you have Bitcoin, you can send those to us. We'll send you gold and or silver, whatever you're choosing. Alternatively, if you have gold and silver and you want Bitcoin, feel free to send us the gold and silver and we will send you Bitcoin. This is a service that we provided for clients since 2012, since when we were opened. You can also peruse the store and see we have all sorts of prep and survival gear, storable food, etc. So thanks for watching the show, and thanks for heading on over to GoldSilverBitcoin.com.